Hello and welcome to this, which is, let me think, it's our eighth Smart Building webinar of 2018. And today we are talking AI video analytics and specifically trying to go through the question, will AI video analytics add real intelligence to video surveillance? So yeah, specifically really talking about the application of artificial intelligence to video surveillance. And I'm really happy to have Carter Maslan back on the webinar this time. Hi, Carter. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Just a couple of things I want to say to everybody. First is just a big thank you to our sponsor, Project Haystack. And they are going a long way to try and help solve or simplify data for the Internet of Things. So it's an open source project, and I'd encourage everybody to go along and have a look. You can find them at project-haystack.org. And it's an open, as I said, it's open source project you can contribute to, and it help to semantically tag data for your IoT projects. And finally, just a message to everyone out there. This is a Q&A, so it's not really, we don't really have a presentation today. It's all questions and answers. We're going to be talking, and we're just really going to be picking Carter's brains here about this really interesting subject of AI and how it applies to video surveillance. And it's interactive, so if you have any questions, please type them in. Very happy to take them, and I'll get them here, and I'll be able to put those questions to Carter, or indeed myself, if you have anything. So yeah, over to Carter. I'm just going to ask you maybe just to give an intro, if that's okay.
Sure. I'm Carter, and I'm a co-founder and CEO of Camio. And we started Camio just with the grandiose ambition to make Google for the real world that could operate on video in real time. But we've learned a lot in the course of pursuing that. And one of the things that we've learned is that this whole notion of artificial intelligence and video analytics is not just video analytics, that there's really kind of a sea change in people's view of what they can get from not only video, but all the other aspects of building sensors and access control and your LDAP entries and your calendars and all kinds of things that I think are at the point now where there's a sea change where people are looking at, instead of having individual applications that are kind of siloed on one function, like line crossing or zone intersection, they're looking more at the modern IT architecture that's driven all the innovation in the web, which is just a lot of layers that can be put together easily and nice modern network APIs into great integrated solutions. So the AI for us has broadened beyond just what you see in pixels in the video, but what do you do about patterns over time and the ways that you want to have cost-effective integrations with all these other systems. So that's part of what I think teed up this conversation with you, Jim, was we're just noticing kind of people wanting to have this IT-oriented modern programmability on what's happening in the real world, and video was certainly a key part of that. And so that's what we're excited to be working on, and I figure we could just dive into topics on things that we're seeing, but that's the general intro on what Camio is doing.
Excellent. Yeah, and let's do that. I mean, and again, I think the conversation that we've had, part of it recently could have stemmed from some of the work I've been doing and that we've written about, looking recently at what we consider sort of, the innovation in generally in the tech world, and how that I feel that that's kind of like filtering down to video surveillance, and specifically this kind of application of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can speak to this with more accuracy, but essentially I feel like it's a combination or bringing together of different things, but two main things, like one being this ability to, or this improvement in algorithms for deep learning, and then this new kind of type of architecture that they're using in terms of GPU to be able to process those algorithms. And companies we've seen that are sort of now becoming more successful at applying that to problems like speech recognition.
Yeah.
Is that, am I in the right direction there? Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, deep learning gets a ton of interest in part because the demos are sexy, where you can just do searches for cats, or you can do
Yeah.
search for FedEx or emergency vehicle or Ford F-150. And so its ability to have enough intelligence to deal with all the different orientations and lighting conditions and stuff is really the thing that was so impressive, really starting only in 2012 or 2013 or so. And so that, coupled with the compute power of GPUs that can just take a workload that used to be prohibitively time consuming or resource, and just getting huge multiples of performance out of that, that has really been, I think you're correctly characterizing that as like the fuel that has enabled this wave of innovation and really neural nets generally, not even just deep learning, which is usually kind of these deep nets that people call like convolutional neural nets, but all kinds of neural nets are just much more capable now. There's just great resources available and great tooling. You know, we've just been really impressed just even in the last year of how much great tools and model development services are out there.
Right, and that's coming from some of the bigger companies like Google, or is that just generally the ecosystem?
Yeah.
Are you're seeing a lot of people focusing?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the big tech companies like Google with their TensorFlow model has been a great aid. Intel has got some great tools that'll take a TensorFlow model and port it to exploit whatever resources are on the chips that you're running on. So having a really flexible mix of CPU and GPU resources available, they'll target that for you. You know, and then you've got all of the people that are working on ways to label and develop training sets, which are critically important. So there's like a whole ecosystem that's forming around the problem of like, how do you get machines to see and understand what's happening? And you know, there's so many dimensions to it because it's assembly and labeling of data. It's all of the compilers that can get your models most efficiently running on various chipsets. It's all of the data analysis and tooling that you'd want to have for the output of these things. So there's a lot of layers, but that's exactly what is exciting to me now, is that when I looked at at least the physical security building landscape at trade shows in the past year, I was like, why is everything so vertically siloed, where you walk the trade floor and it just feels like people are selling variations of the same thing on different brands, and it doesn't feel like a tech industry where you've got collaborating partners that are exploiting each other's strengths at different layers and stuff. And now I feel like that's happening at some level. It's like the tech plumbing below is growing higher to start imbuing these other systems with that same spirit of, hey, I've got the best chipset for you. I've got the best TensorFlow compiler for you to use. I've got the best labeling service with human-assisted review, and so it feels exciting that we're getting that kind of layered innovation that you see and drove the past 20 years in the web.
Well, that's great to hear, actually, because I mean, it's definitely something that I've felt as well when you walk trade shows, in the sort of 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
or even that it's
Yeah, I mean, it's still like that to some level, but it's still like that today as a snapshot. But I can see that directionally there's a sea change happening where people are like, why can't I integrate, this visitor management with my access control that's corroborated by video? Why is it so hard to do that? And so I think people are starting to at least ask those questions. And then the IT groups that are getting hammered with security vulnerabilities and things, I think they're a big driver where they're saying, hey, all the future systems we buy, let's make them modern IT oriented, where people know how to grant limited scope authorization on resources, and they know how to do things that are, not requiring open ports that are the source of outside attacks on our network and stuff. So I think it's a combination of things. One, end users that grew up on mobile phones are all of a sudden saying like, why isn't this just seamless integration as I enter in my office? And then you've got the IT groups feeling, you know, why has the physical security systems been in this kind of isolated area that doesn't know how to talk modern SSL and REST APIs over regular kind of SaaS style integrations that they're doing with all their other businesses, from CRM to ERP and others. So I think those two things are creating a sea change.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, and I think getting these kind of different innovations coming from IT is now really having a big impact on physical security. So yeah, it's great, and I know, I mean, clearly, I think your company is a good example of that. Like, you've come from that world, and you're applying these techniques into security. I guess that was something I wanted to dig in with you at the start. Is really, what are your experiences of applying some of these AI techniques to video? Because I know, I mean, for example, your company is well known for being able to search video, for being able to type in, okay, blue van, and be able to see, to see that video straight up. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about like how that evolved and what challenges you've had, and how you think that's improved over the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, so when we started, I think kind of the key thing that we realized is that if you're recording video and no one's looking at it, then that category is really just liability archive. It's kind of like there's not all cameras are created equal. There's some, like a hotel gym, where you may really only care about the liability protection of someone claiming that you hadn't maintained the treadmill correctly or something. But then there's all these other cameras where you really want to take action, whether it's like monitoring an oil pipeline, or it's a security operations center for a large food manufacturer, or it's a real estate company that's got, sensitive building entrances, and all these things where you really want to be able to know what's happening. It kind of raised the bar to say, okay, we can't just record video easily. We have to, it has to be smart. And so when we started that smartness quest, we quickly realized that if you ran, deep learning labeling on every frame of video, like a lot of these systems that have beefy GPUs that are on site looking at every frame, you're going to have a very expensive system, because the compute power required to do these things on a continuous 30 frame per second HD video is just, they're expensive, beefy GPUs. And so we went from, okay, video has to be smart to be useful if you want to take action on something, to it's really expensive if you try to make it smart. So then the real engineering challenge is, how do you do that at a low cost? And so most of our efforts have been on delivering at low cost, which has a whole bunch of stages to it that we've learned that have to be kind of sequenced to be able to get the cost low. So so when it comes to our approach and what we've learned about artificial intelligence, is it's really, I think, two big things. One is, all cameras aren't created equal, so every single camera scene has different characteristics about what's interesting in it, because it's not just the content it's observing, but it's what is that specific camera's scene patterns over time. And the second is that you have to do things in layers to get the cost down. So you might want to first weed out all the background scene noise, and then determine whether it's an interesting motion flow, and then identify salient things that are happening. And then, at the very tail end is when you want to apply the expensive compute. So, so in terms of our kind of history as a company, we started with just trying to get the pipeline vetted with these repurposed cell phone apps. So early in the company, we were literally just having people's cell phones and tablets in the drawer as free cameras just to get the pipeline going. And then it was when we were doing this video gateway that had this hybrid approach where you could have the analysis on the local network, but then coordinated in the cloud. That was the big switch for us into this B2B VSaaS model with APIs that power other people's solutions. The key part of that powering of the solution was this on-premise video gateway that gave the flexibility to do these cost tweaks. Because once you have something that can operate on a closed network, meaning there's no need for inbound ports, it can analyze the video on the local network while having SSL only communication with coordinated with cloud services, then you have a lot of latitude in changing the cost profile by camera, because you can do things like schedule-based changes, or we call it interest-based video compression, because it's basically changing its decisions on everything from the video encoding to the class of storage to the kinds of analyses based on what's happening in the video. And so unlike normal H.264, H.265 compression, where you're just trying to get video into a small representation, this is like a layer above that, where you use artificial intelligence to make the video change a whole host of things about the way you're processing it. And so really that's where we are today, is that we're really focused on this hybrid edge cloud approach with an on-premise gateway that gives a lot of flexibility in the cost profile per camera.
Okay, so in a sense, my takeaway from that was that you're using AI in quite a nuanced way, right? In that you're looking at it to help you not just compress the video, but also in some way, understand what is important and what isn't important in that image.
Yes. Yeah, and the AI is at different layers. Like you have like some AI that's just trying to guess on what's normal scene background, and then some AI that's learning importance of events based on the motion flows, and then some AI that is just got the task of visual analysis, which is what most people associate with these deep learning things. They're like, here's a picture of X, and then how well can you label X? Right. But that's really just one factor, and because most people with like practical video surveillance concerns, you get a lot of value out of these other things even before you know whether it's a FedEx truck or a van. You just being able to know what warrants human attention is a huge part of the learning.
Okay, so it's important to know what the important things are in that video image, and also what the not important parts are as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then that all helps when you know where to then apply your processing power.
Exactly. Exactly. Like one of the things that is that we do is, like, if you have, let's say that you're monitoring a car dealership at night, you may have no activity from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. And when you know that there's no activity, you can do a low res time lapse of that whole time period. So you still have the continuous auditable history that there was nobody in the lot at that hour, but you're not burning up bandwidth for things that might be connected over 4G networks, or even with the regular landline connections now, there are data limits and stuff. So there's even stuff like that that just makes a very pragmatic difference to the cost profile of deployments through AI. And so so yeah, I'd say cost is a big focus of AI. It's kind of like Google's data centers that get a lot of value out of just scheduling the cooling system. It feels very mundane to say, we've got, years of research and it culminates in like your cooling system. But that kind of mundane stuff is actually really interesting applications of AI.
Right. And no doubt it's saving them a hell of a lot of money as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick one for everyone listening. If you have any questions, please type them in. I'm happy to put them to Carter, or if there's anything you want to ask me, please do that. Um, One of the things I'm interested in as well, Carter, is when I think you mentioned neural nets earlier. Is there a specific type of is that like the type of algorithm that you're using in these scenarios, or are you again?
Yeah.
Is it a certain tool for different types of processing?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are different classes of neural nets. So the ones that we use, if you just kind of the definitional kind of recurrent neural nets versus LSTMs versus CNNs, there are different classes of neural nets, but they all have the same fundamentals where you're just trying to have these statistical models predict what you want them to predict based on the inputs. And so there are a whole bunch, I mean, there's a lot of research that has gone into kind of the capabilities of the current class of nets and stuff. But when you look at the research, really, a lot of it comes down to the engineering practice. So it's like one of these fields where it's the practice of the art that is more interesting to people sometimes than the actual research parts of it, because there's so much that's predicated on data and how you kind of strategize on what attributes of the data you're feeding into the nets and stuff. It becomes an area that is got a lot of good choices, and a lot of experimentation. It's hard to predict. It's hard to predict what works without trying stuff. So, you know, as a company, Camio is very focused on just the speed of being able to try stuff as hypotheses, because that's really what you need. I mean, you can develop an intuition over time in a certain domain of problems and stuff, but one of the key things is just making sure you're iterating quickly, because that's how you solve the problem. It's hard to do it just looking at things at face value and saying, oh, here's what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting, but the short answer is yes, there's a lot of different kinds of neural nets. We use the regular recurrent neural nets and the LSTMs and CNNs. So there's different classes.
And how critical to this process is the kind of training data? So I mean, I sometimes get a sense, especially when you look at what other like the bigger companies are doing. You know, they talk about natural language processing and speech recognition. Is that they're obviously collecting all of this data from us all the time, and that's essentially being used to train these algorithms. I mean, is that really how it's working, or how is that process?
I mean, at the core, yes, lots of data is definitely critical. However, what's happening is some of the big tech players and even the open source efforts are delivering lower layers in the model that you can then specialize with less data. So it's the interesting thing to me is that when all of this started, people were saying only the big tech giants are going to be able to do this, because only they have the size of data that could make this productive. Because everybody else is going to have to do algorithms where they just come up with heuristics. But what's happening is some of that huge data set value is getting baked into layers that you can then use and specialize in subsequent layers. So when you are doing development, let's say, I'm going to just simplify by saying there's 4 layers. And let's say the first layer is the most expensive, where you're understanding the features of an image, whether it's like the edges or boundaries or whatever. That's what that neural net is kind of firing to try to do. And then you have subsequent layers that will learn other aspects that are piled on top of each other. And some of the cool kind of open source efforts even are publishing things that are already giving you that first couple layers, and then you are putting your layers on top of that. So that's a long way to say that it is a big data problem for sure, but there are techniques where you can exploit work that preceded you, and then have your data not be so massive. Like you might only need 1,000 samples of something, not 14 million. And so that's another big focus of ours, is like, if you're doing, if each camera is different and the interesting things are different in each camera, then you have to learn more quickly than having millions of data points, because you don't want people to have to wait a month before their cameras are smart. And so you basically come up with techniques that amplify the feedback you do have, so that you can learn faster, or you have models that can learn faster from fewer data samples. And so anyway, it is a big data problem, but there are things that are making it more accessible even to smaller amounts of labeled data.
Right. I guess, like most things, it's more nuanced than that, because not all data is relevant all the time.
Yeah. And picking what you want to feed, but that's kind of the art part, is like you can have like unsupervised learning that kind of discovers the things that you should be paying attention to, or you can kind of supervise in a way that kind of directs the learning to try to do it with perhaps less data needed. So it's a very it depends kind of answer, which is part of what we're trying to solve, is like, how do you get away from it depends answers and get more towards recipes that everybody can understand up front, and just say, yes, I want to solve this problem in workplace safety, and I understand we're going to have this number of false positives, this number of false negatives, and it'll be roughly this amount of compute cost. So we're trying to get that more standardized, so it's not a long discussion like this over all the different choices, methods, and stuff.
So, question here coming for you. It's just asking, what are the main verticals using AI, and what are the specific applications? So, I mean, we talked, I think, about one application of where you're using it to work out what's important, right, within the image. Are you using it in other aspects of your system?
Yeah, well, basically, if you just look at from the time that like a video pixel is recorded through the time that you're doing a search, that goes through the neural nets that are just adjusting to the background scene noise, like shimmering leaves or rippling water, to the neural nets that are looking at the motion flows to say, does this intersect with, is this motion flow pattern interesting in terms of the size and direction of movement and stuff? And then there's others that say, okay, given the fact that it intersected some zones that were explicitly marked as interesting, like I really want to know if people come into the front entrance of my store, those kinds of things will provide feedback on whether the event's interesting. And then finally, what user actions take. So if you've got a security operations center that's reviewing alarm triggers or things that warrant attention, then the things that they play or share or save, those are also feedback loops that get processed offline in retraining the models. So part of the thing about having this stuff cloud connected is just so that you can do this closed loop training, because otherwise, you can't just put a system isolated and expect it to learn magically. It's got to have some feedback to know whether it's right or wrong. And so that closed loop and just the way that people use the product, so you don't have to go in and say, I'm training my video analytics. They just say, I'm using the video for my security operations center, and as a byproduct, the things that I do are providing valuable feedback loops that will get my camera smarter to be a better lookout for the things that should get my attention. So short answer is that all of those layers have their own strategies and feedback loops on training the models.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was going to say, like, and you mentioned their security centers. Are there sort of specific verticals where you think, or people have approached you and said, like, it's a huge problem for us is, having too much video to watch or whatever, and can you help us solve this?
That's basically there's a, at least our focus area is on people that need to take action on what's happening, and which is not all cameras, clearly, because like I say, some are just for archive liability, but people that have distributed facilities, even multi-campus corporate buildings and stuff, they'll want to actively monitor things that are unusual. And so that is a core focus of ours. And the kind of the sweet spot for Camio, at least, is people with a lot of distributed facilities where they want to have an efficient security operations center that can know what's happening and act on it. And so that's where the unit of measurement is like cost per monitored video hour, as opposed to just recorded hour. And so that's where there's big savings. If you can take something that used to take, I mean, just to give you a trivial example, there's a large office building where the tenants would complain that their water bottles went missing over the weekend. And that used to take, the security staff, 6-8 hours just to find what happened over the 2.5-day weekend period. And, to be able to do that in 5 seconds is a big productivity savings. But then you apply that same kind of dynamic savings of like 4 hours to 5 seconds on being able to act on things. That's what our core focus is like efficient, cost-effective remote video monitoring.
Cost-effective remote video monitoring, right? And have you been able to measure like that productivity gain?
We have in like investigative scenarios where people will say, this took us literally 5 seconds, which used to take us 4 hours. But that 4 hours was inclusive of, sometimes it was even inclusive of having to get like a USB thumb drive to get it off the on-premise NVR and then import it and then watch the linear playback and then, ping pong between hours until you saw the missing thing. So it varies, but we don't have, I think we should have like a published kind of study, because I think it would be really helpful for our own marketing just to show the stats from places. But we have to work with people that will share their stats and stuff. So we don't have anything published, but I think that would be a great research publisher topic, is just to show the before and after if people would share their data.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the trick, isn't it, to get people to share the data? But I think as an industry, that isn't. I mean, that's sort of a criticism of mine. Is sometimes I think we focus too much on the tech of it. Like how many megapixels that camera has or whatever, and rather than okay, like this is the measurable benefit that we can see from using these techniques. Yeah. I mean, in terms of. And some of the things the problem is that if there's some deterrent effect, then that takes a long time to measure the deterrent effect. And then if the events are very sporadic, then it's like you may gear up to do a study for this 30-day period, but then, the event you were trying to prevent didn't happen until day 36, so there are problems with that. But I think just looking at it as like monitored video hour cost, that, if you care enough to have a building that has a secure entrance or something, then measuring how effectively are you securing that entrance by not missing events and by being able to respond to things that should be responded to. I think just that as a unit of measure is helpful. Do you have examples in other verticals of like use cases? I mean, like retail or transport or areas like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of our problem, is that there's so many different scenarios that we were trying to focus on this security operations center, because that's like a clear area. But people are using it from everything from, I think I had maybe previously mentioned to you, people wanting to use the technology to count yellowfin, bluefin, and marlins on fishing boats, even where they are out at sea for 3 weeks recording video,
Mm-hmm.
And for regulatory compliance and fisheries management, they want to actually count how many different fish were caught on these long line tuna boats and stuff in the South Pacific. And so that they're like those kind of really non-security oriented scenarios of AI and analytics. And then there are things like, mines where they have remote facilities that are just over 3G and very quiet scenes, but they just need the most bandwidth efficient way to know if there's sabotage or theft or things on those remote facilities that are hard to get people dispatched to. And so that's more of a challenge of interest level with very extreme bandwidth efficiency than just really fancy AI analytics. So the spectrum is very broad. There's companies that specialize in things like retail and stuff. We don't specialize in that ourselves, but there are a wide range of scenarios. We're just focused on this kind of cost-effective remote video monitoring for security operations centers as our kind of first focus area.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. But as you alluded to, I think what really excites some people is that the potential beyond security that maybe this kind of AI offers.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the convenience factor, like everybody with these shared workspaces like WeWork, they go into a big office tower, and let's say you have an appointment at 2 p.m. to meet somebody in a shared office space. And if the front desk in front of the elevator has a 15-person line waiting to check in with a security guard that doesn't know who you are from Adam and makes a phone call to see if you're expecting the guest and then issues you a temporary paper badge that checks you in through the elevator gates, but it doesn't work when you get to the office access control. It's like that kind of sequence, even if it's just the convenience of being able to say, hey, I have an appointment with Julie at 2 p.m. and I literally just walk in. What could be possible is you just walk in with your phone and you've got a QR code that badges you in, and you meet the person because they got a snapshot of your face with a quick SMS that lets you in with a QR code. So those kinds of convenient scenarios that people say, why can't you do that to make it that easy to have these large office buildings with shared spaces with secure access that just flows from all of the signals from people's email addresses and calendars and LDAP entries, and why can't you make that happen? And I think that's the thing that's getting people excited on the non just security side, but just like convenience and ease, where I kind of view it as like ambient computing. It just does the right thing based on all these signals that it has to let you do your work and just flow, but still have the security behind it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question I've been asking myself for quite a few years. Why has there not been more integration? But I mean,
it's because it's been so hard. It's like if you go with any of these integrations, it's unbelievable where they'll say, well, step one is install these ActiveX SDK controls on premise to, it's just crazy. So most of the trend, I hope, is that people use these modern network APIs that are just all about interop and not even at the level of knowing any kind of, I'm not talking about standards, like not like data standards or anything, but just the basic ability for two things to talk to one another securely. That's like step one. And that's really where we are with a lot of these systems, is they weren't designed that way. They were designed initially for these on-premise siloed systems, and they need to get these kind of modern APIs around them just for basic interop.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about security now, but I mean, equally, we could be talking about various other smart building applications, building energy management or lighting controls. They are siloed. This isn't a unique problem to security. It's just, I wonder why. Well, I think from my perspective, there's a couple of things. Like one, perhaps there's just a huge amount of legacy that comes with this industry, right? Of like the way that it's been done before, and And I think some of these techniques, like a lot of manufacturers are perhaps, a bit reticent because they're not sure how it impacts their business in the long run. If they perhaps sort of, I guess they think, if we take on these sort of new open standards and new APIs, does that mean that we lose perhaps business somewhere down the line? I think that's the wrong way to think. The wrong way to think about it. But I do sense sometimes that has to be one of the reasons why it's not moving faster.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think at least here in Silicon Valley, some large tech companies and not just tech companies, but property management companies and others are starting to say, we're just not going to buy with an architecture that is going to not meet our needs, and we might have to refresh our purchase in 3 years. So they're starting to demand these interop standards. Yeah. So I think that's the point. It's only when the end user, big buying customers say, it's not acceptable for you to sell us a system that's can't talk to anything and has vulnerabilities, and we can't integrate with in the way that we want. And so I think that's what is changing, is that now people are starting to say that. They may not have immediate choices, but they'll just say, I'm going to just postpone my purchases until this is the way that I want it, because I don't want to have to do it twice.
No, it's a great point. I mean, that's what's really going to drive change, right? The end user and the system integrators demanding better interoperability. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and just pointing out that it can be just complete win-win. Like, it can drive new business for people. And I think some of the reasons that people haven't moved is they just have mismatched expectations. Like, I was talking with one company that was saying, you can't annotate video with access control events. We get over 1.5 million badge-ins a day. That's like volume. And I'm looking at that saying that's a trivial number. And so it's like, I think there's some mindset where, an on-premise system says, well, how are we going to handle that many? And that's such a low number in terms of cloud web scale that I think there's some just cognitive reorientation, and then some kind of the end customers banding together saying, this is what we demand of our systems, that starts affecting the buy cycles, and then the industry will start changing, I think. So that's where I feel like we are right now. We're just like on the verge of this sea change.
And do you think that's going to have a bigger impact than some of the things we've been talking about around AI?
I mean, personally, I just think AI is much bigger than video analytics. So people tend to put AI in the category of video analytics. And that, to me, when I hear video analytics, I think of things like zone intersection and line crossing and license plate recognition and stuff. And what I really think is that once you have interop and you have many different kinds of data signals and many different ways to make things more useful, that's the bigger energy behind all of these system changes, is that it's like, it's not just that I can do like a better line crossing or something. And so that's the thing. I think the two big things are, AI is much more than just video analytics. It's all the smart plumbing that goes in connecting everything and how it behaves when it's connected. And then two, this interop around modern IT practices is the thing that really unleashes the layered innovation that you see in the web. And so I think those two things are kind of the key that'll get things moving.
Right. And if we can bring those two things together, then who knows? Where we can take video surveillance.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically like enabling machines to see and tell you what warrants your attention. It's like everything from OSHA workplace safety. We have customers that want to know, hey, can you tell me anytime somebody is on premise without a hard hat or a vest for their personal protective equipment, PPE.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's all kinds of things where people just have good economics behind it. It's like, I don't want to send an inspector with a clipboard only for periodic sampling. I'd love to just have machines that understand what are risks that are happening to help mitigate them. And so all of those kinds of scenarios come from being able to program these things and have the data flow to the right people with the right permissions, with all secure network communication. So all of this stuff I think is going to put pressure. As customers increase their demands, then things will start changing.
Right, their expectations grow. 'Cause, I mean, you used the analogy before,
Yeah.
and I think it's a valid one about, the people in their day-to-day lives, things just work together now for whatever reason,
Right.
right? So, I mean, I guess that hopefully has an impact on what people's expectation is for what they should, or the end user's
Yeah.
expectation for what they should get out of a video surveillance system.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a well-tread pattern where even things on the consumer side, they grow with such scale, and then their expectations. There's a lot of comedians that do jokes about that, where you're on the airplane at 35,000 feet, complaining that you can't watch your, latest video, or your entire music library is not accessible, and so I think it's the same thing happens when a millennial walks into a WeWork office building and it's like, what do you mean you don't know that I'm here? My phone is here with me, and why are you giving me this temporary badge when I've got my phone on me? And so, so it's the same kinds of consumer expectations infiltrating enterprise stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We've had another question come in, interesting one. So how do you integrate your software into a VMS software? Are you doing that? Do you have some specific examples of where the two are kind of working together?
Yeah, like we lit up some cities that had milestone VMS, and basically anything that has an RTSP stream works with Camio. So we just plug into the RTSP streams of the videos to do on-premise analysis part. And then you can deploy, when you've got something like an NVR or a VMS on site, you can even record the high-res video only in those systems and then just have like what we call lazy fetch of the video. So Camio can still extract the information content for fast search and alerts. And then only when you press the play button will it go fetch the video backing. So it gives you a really bandwidth efficient way to make the video smart and responsive without necessarily moving video around. So the short answer is any NVR camera or VMS that provides an RTSP stream, or not even necessarily RTSP, any H.264 video stream can be made smart. So that's how we work with it. The on-premise gateway just analyzes those local streams.
Okay. And you also have like a standard like RESTful API as well. Is that right? You can make calls to specific. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah.
Is it per stream of video? Is it?
Yeah. The general architecture is that you can register hooks, which are like callbacks when certain things happen. So, just as an example, let's say that you want a human to review any time a person approaches the rear loading dock between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. You can fire a hook, you can register a hook rather on the query 2 a.m., 6 a.m. people rear loading dock. And anytime an event matches that query, that hook fires and includes all the descriptive information of the event, so that a review system could take a look at it as a way to extend the functionality of just a VMS. You could hook it into any kind of workflow because of the fact that you're connected to the cloud, and you can do these programmatic calls via hooks. But it's not just for those workflow hooks. You can also do additional analyses or data collection. So you can also say, anytime a car approaches the garage entrance, I want to fire a hook that does additional analysis of the make and model or the license plate. And so the idea is that the pipeline is totally extensible and programmable. So you can add additional labeling services. You can add additional data streaming services. You can queue up workflows for people to take a look at stuff. All of that becomes programmable just with REST APIs. Everything is just JSON and SSL REST APIs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then it's up to the individual then, or the organization to decide what it is that they're interested in and how they want to handle that information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We just will compose customized subscription plans that can say, okay, I want to have make and model of car labeling and face detection, but not necessarily face recognition. But then I need 90 days video history for my compliance. So you basically put this a la carte menu of services that you want applied to your video, and then it spits out a subscription plan with that exact service plan. Mm-hmm. And it can even include things like varying the recording schedule. We have some people where they really just care about nighttime monitoring, and so they don't care about all the daytime activities. So they may say, during the daytime, I still want to alert if emergency vehicles are on the site, but I don't need to record anything during the daytime. Just make me aware of any events that warrant my attention. But at nighttime, I want full HD recording and proactive alerts on all events. And that kind of schedule-based varying of your service level is also built in.
Mm-hmm. I've got a few minutes left. So anyone else who has any questions, please put them in. But I also, wanted to sort of dig in a little bit, and I guess this is actually just more about your opinion. But I mean, from what I've seen, like in the general IT world, is there like a ton of money being put into chip companies, especially the ones that are now focused on kind of AI applications. And what has sort of traditionally driven the IT company, Moore's law, and that continually, increasing processing power. Do you think that this is kind of the new Moore's law, right? Is that increasingly the IT industry is going to be driven more by like these algorithms and these sort of the new chip companies that are trying to fuse hardware and software together?
Yeah, I mean, I think the demand for compute power will be insatiable for as far as I can see, because the things that you can do with increased compute, it's all about like the price and the power consumption, even heat and stuff. So there's going to be innovations in those different dimensions. Like you may just have like a super powerful, capable chipset, but then another one may differentiate by saying, well, we may not be quite as powerful, but look at how low our energy draw is. Or this one will say, now we can do the same level of compute, but we can keep our heat profile so low that you can deploy it without breakable fans out in the desert in the middle of Texas. And so I think all those dimensions of, so basically, there's no shortage of uses for this increased compute power. And in this contrast from maybe even like 6 years ago, where people were saying, I'm not sure faster clock times and CPUs matter that much anymore. And now all of a sudden it's the opposite. It's like, oh my God, we've got so many things we'd do if we had more compute power. So I definitely think that the investment is both warranted and interesting, because I think it's going to open up so many things by having that massive power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, it's a very kind of broad question, but it's interesting to me how this seems.
And it may be the difference that you're getting at. I don't know if it's like, instead of just looking at a single processor's Moore's law curve, it's more like, how do you put together a combination of things? Like, how does the GPU talk to the CPU? How do they share memory? I think there's going to be things that are bigger impact to what you can do than just looking at the speed of the clock speed of a chip. So maybe that's what you were getting at, is that it's not Moore's law in the sense of just like these linear clock speed flops, but it's more like the architecture behind the way these chipsets work together.
Right.
That's opening, because you end up with bottlenecks that used to not be bottlenecks. Like, how do you get data from the CPU to the GPU and back? And then those kind of those kind of bottlenecks and just shared memory become a problem. And so I think those are the kind of innovations that people will be working on.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, it's just a fascinating time to be watching these kind of technologies develop. And then again, like trying to work out how it impacts on video processing. Couple more questions for you, and I think it's specifically regarding Camio. Where is sort of the deep learning then in your system running? Is it at the edge or in the cloud, or do you have like your own kind of VMS?
It's both. It's a hybrid. So some of the deep learning runs on the edge, meaning for us, the gateway. I mean, eventually, I hope cameras have the ability to do it. But if the camera's chipset can't do it, then at least the Camio box video gateway does it on the edge. And then we have some in the cloud. So it's very much a hybrid because you basically have different things that run better at different locations. And we do both on box deployment.
I was going to say it's a trade-off then. Is it like some things are better processed at the edge and some things are better processed in the cloud?
Yeah, like some models, when you do a deep learning model, they can be big and small. So you might have a model that could be like 500 megabytes or one that's like 100 megabytes or something. And so moving that model to be run at the edge for inference is simpler when the models are smaller. So you kind of, if you think of things as like a funnel, you kind of want to put your cheaper, easier stuff that's filtering a lot at the front end on premise at the edge, and then reserve the deep, complex stuff in the cloud where you don't want to be shipping around these huge models to all your edge clients. So it's always going to be a hybrid, I think, and that's the other part that we focus on a lot is like putting the right compute at the right place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sort of a European specific question here. I don't know if you've got a view on this, but again, around data privacy, right? So, a lot of talk over here about GDPR. Is that something which is going to impact the way that we can process data and what we can keep and how, in inverted commas, how intelligent we can become?
Yes, definitely. Like the GDPR compliance, I think it's a great directional thing, and it's a good thing, but it also had like really bad negative consequences. Like one of the directives of GDPR is that you have to be able to delete all the data associated with a user when they close their account. And the irony of that is that means you now have to correlate all the data with a user. Because if you're promising to delete it, that means you know what to delete. And so there are these unintended negative things, but in general, I think everybody's going to have to be super careful about the way they store information to make sure that, especially when you look at things like face recognition. Camio stores hashes of people's facial features if you enable face recognition. Mm-hmm. And those hashes are truly meaningless. They're just like, strings that are encoding of that facial feature, so you could find that person. But that raises like implications on what do you do with those hashes if they're not personally identifiable information, and you're not even sure they're correlated with any particular person, because you could have inaccuracies that commingle those hashes and stuff. So there's all kinds of interesting things that have to be thought through, but I think it's all goodness in the sense of this move to like modern IT, good data privacy, transparency on what you're doing with data liberation, meaning you can export and take your data with you. All of these things are great. So I think overall, I think it's a great thing. There's just some gotchas that I think were unintended that I think will probably be adjusted over time.
Yeah, right. Some kinks, I guess, to work out. But, I don't think that's normal, I think, in that process. But yeah, that's an interesting insight for sure. Carter, is there I guess one of the final things to finish off, I know you've talked about interoperability, but are you specifically working on that now? You're looking at some open initiatives that
Yeah,
you
well,
specifically are working on?
yeah, yeah. Well, some Bay Area companies wanted to form this opensectech.org, and we started and have like founding members that are, you know, big tech companies that want this open interop. But we've also been running across other groups that have similar objectives. So we're right now both forming a group and considering whether to merge with others. But the basic goal is just to bring kind of an end user focus to security where everything is open, meaning that it's got just some very core principles like, does your service have network APIs over secure channels, SSL? Like, that's one criteria. Second one is the data liberated? Can you move the data in and out of your system? And then third is, do you have scoped authorization? Meaning you don't just have username and passwords, but you could grant limited access for limited operations that work well with existing identity systems. And then final is this data privacy thing that you're mentioning with GDPR and others. It's like, do you have full control and transparency on your data compliance and privacy policies? And so just some of these core tenets, they're very simple. It's just like, does it work with network APIs? Can I control my data? Can I control access? And is there good privacy controls in place? Those are the kinds of things that enable the solutions that these big tech companies want. Like, give me a warning if some unauthorized person has entered a secure server area in hours that they weren't scheduled. You know, that kind of simple question doesn't have a simple answer without some of this groundwork. So we're putting together opensectech.org. It's open, SECTECH rather, .org. And that may merge with another group that I recently discovered that had a very similar charter. So, but the goal is to do what we were describing, where enable the end customers without vendors expressing, here are the things we need, and using their collective buying power to have that in effect.
Good. Well, you have to keep us posted about that. But you mentioned the website there, so
Yeah.
I encourage everybody listening to check that out and lend your support. I think it's definitely something that's needed in the security industry. From my side, if anyone's interested in some of the research we've been doing, we just discussed a lot of these topics in our Intelligent Video Analytics report, which is available. You can go to our website, memoori.com. And Carter, if anyone's sort of got a specific question for you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Carter at camio.com. It's CARTER@CAMIO.com.
Great. I'm sure hopefully you'll get some good questions coming your way. And thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate
it. Yeah. Great talking to you.
And thanks everyone for listening. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.